Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name's Carla and I am the Director of Communications and Events at Kinship. And we're so excited to be hosting this event alongside Leap. I'd love to introduce you to our two hosts for the day, Renaldo and Zubin. Leap alum Renaldo is actually the founder and chief product officer at Bhettay. Inspired by his dog Winston, Renaldo founded Bhettay after deciding he didn't want to feed his dog anything less than real food. After making hundreds of batches of home-cooked dog food for Winston and his pup pals, Renaldo decided to launch a pet food brand that he could proudly call his own. Prior to Bhettay, he worked at Catterton and McKinsey and launched Bhettay as a nationwide subscription service in early 2017, following a great appearance on hit TV show and my personal favorite, Shark Tank. Zubin is co-founder and CEO at Fuzzy Pet Health, focused on the longevity of our pets through greater access to healthcare. Fuzzy's engaging consumer telehealth platform includes tools to keep track of essential pet health information such as weight, nutrition, skin health, energy, and activity. Fuzzy vets use data captured on each pet to provide tailored recommendations around medications, supplements, nutrition, exercise, and training, all focused on longevity and quality of life for pets. So before we get started, I want to encourage dialogue and participation from all of those joining us today. But as a reminder, our topic for today is the lack of diversity in pet care and the industry at large, and how we as a community can ignite the much needed change. Let's do our best to stay on topic. And we'd really appreciate if everyone please practices active listening while someone else is sharing and tries not to interrupt when someone else is speaking, which I know can be a little bit difficult on Zoom, but we appreciate your efforts. And also, most importantly, let's just assume great intentions from everyone in the room. Let's try to keep any answers and commentary to a minute so we can keep the dialogue going. So let's get started. You mentioned that you were quite shocked by the lack of diversity you were seeing at conferences and in other rooms, so to speak. So why do you think that there is such a significant lack of Black founders and Black representation?
Yeah, I think when you really kind of peel it back, I would say that there's probably just, a lack of, I think if you go and you look at just how, in terms of, founding companies, how it takes place, usually through soft introductions, you're getting introduced to people that have access to capital. I think that entire process is very limiting to, not only like minority founders, women founders, et cetera. So I think you could, really see that in terms of just how, just deploying capital works right now in the US is just subpar. I also think that there's just a lack of, interest in, probably what would be, very exciting, small businesses as well. I'm sure there are countless, dog groomers, walkers, et cetera, across the country, that may not be looking to raise, tens of millions of dollars, but, still can grow like very like exciting businesses in their own backyards. And I think that there are a lack of resources and kind of, small business funding, et cetera, for those individuals as well. So I think it kind of spans the gambit, but, I think we should also kind of frame it properly, because I don't know if there's necessarily like a lack of diversity in, the pet industry. Me going to pet factories, the warehouses at these factories, seeing the people that are actually providing the inputs that are kind of going into dog food, et cetera. There's not a lack of diversity there. It's when you look at kind of who's running the marketing, who's making the finance decisions, that you see there's a lack of diversity. Even within kind of across some of the tech companies, right? If you look at their customer service teams, probably more diverse than if you look at their leadership teams. So I think everyone needs to kind of, question what roles we're looking to put certain people in and why, and kind of challenge how we traditionally go about either recruiting, looking for companies to fund, or, companies that you might, be interested in making angel investments in, providing mentorship to, et cetera. So that's probably how we think about the entire spectrum of it all.
Zubin, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll agree. There certainly is representation across the industry, and that representation is growing. If you look at acceptance rates at universities today versus what they were 20 years ago for DVM programs, that rate of acceptance for people of color is certainly higher today than it was 20 years ago. But it's still very small. And one of the things that I point to, specifically in the tech industry, is there the wealth gap that has been created has just gotten wider and wider as decades have passed. And I think Renaldo will attest to this. I certainly can. But starting a company is expensive, right? And a lot of people get into debt going into it. And actually, not only starting a company is expensive, but getting access to the first $100,000 or $200,000 of capital. It's less accessible for people of color to go and get a friends and family round of $200,000, where the other folks out there do have more access. And I'm not saying that applies to everyone, but that certainly is the case in many instances. And the same thing applies if you look at DVM programs. Going to a veterinary school is expensive. If you think about the student debt that accompanies it, and obviously the impact on mental well-being that we can certainly speak to at length that exists within the veterinary community. In many ways, it is not as accessible, and the systems and tools available to people of color are not as available as they are to white people. And I think one of the things that I speak to is, or if you think about feeling welcome in an industry or feeling welcome in a community, if you walk into a room and you don't see anyone that looks like you, immediately your sense of feeling welcome is dealt a blow. Now, there's certainly actions or behaviors that can assist in getting you into feeling part of a community. But it's taken a long time for us to get to the point that we are right now, that we're having the conversation around the unconscious bias and the racial injustice that has existed within industries for such a long time. And like one other point there, if you think about things, I was fortunate. I worked in tech a long time ago at a time when, at Xerox, at a time when Ursula Burns was the CEO at Xerox, right? First Black woman to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And if you look at the world today versus then, there are fewer Black Fortune 500 CEOs today than there were 15 years ago. And also there's zero Black female Fortune 500 CEOs. And so that's something that we need to address for in some way, shape, or form, and hopefully kind of not continue to pick the same people, but broaden access to people.
Oops. Francesca, were you going to add something, or? Anyways, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself. Zubin, you touched on the concept of unconscious bias. And in your experience, is this something that you've experienced throughout your journey as an entrepreneur? When I spoke to you before, you know, it sounds like you've had quite the career. You've sought funding multiple times with different businesses. Was it mainly in that part of your entrepreneurial journey, or were there other touch points that you felt that there was unconscious bias going on?
Sometimes it's not so unconscious, and sometimes it's very clear what is happening. And so I've certainly seen both sides of that. And absolutely going down the fundraising path, I have certainly seen it, I've felt it, I've witnessed it in my company today, but in previous companies that I've been involved into. So I think, again, you can look at the amount of M&A activity, investment activity, and executives of color and leadership positions across the biggest organizations in our category. And I think that it's incredibly clear that there has been unconscious bias and racial bias that has existed, that has almost perpetuated an unfortunate series of events.
Assad mentioned in the chat he's heard from a lot of investors, leaders, founders saying that it's a pipeline issue both for talent and investments. What are your thoughts on that?
And I'll jump in here. I mean, I it's kind of hard to, I think it's like a pipeline issue when you see this across every industry and, in largely in kind of tech, et cetera, right? I think there are, a number of Black, Harvard Business School grads, Stanford School grads, et cetera, that I think all, experience, similar sentiments to like myself and Zubin kind of going through the fundraising process. And I think, if you have enough of those examples, you have to kind of question, why is this the case? And I also think it's important to think about it just from the human perspective. When you're going through, this funding aspect, obviously it's hard as a founder going out and doing the pitching, et cetera, for anyone, regardless of, color, race, et cetera, gender, et cetera. But, you always start questioning yourself, okay, is it that there is like an unconscious bias going on, or is there some sort of, racism, or are my metrics just bad? Right. So it's so you get yourself in this really weird cycle that now it's kind of confounded the already difficult part of raising and growing a business. So it's also important, I think, just to realize the human element to all of this, right? I think a podcaster heard just wanted to remind everyone, hey, Black people are people too. So, so it just makes things more difficult than they need to be. And also, I think stops people from necessarily kind of pushing further to get it over the finish line necessarily. So I think when you're in these conversations, it's important to kind of keep that, even if, the metrics maybe aren't there. I don't know if it's important maybe to highlight that more or to come with more concrete examples versus, I'm sure, Zubin has seen this as well, like, oh, just not a fit right now, or, whatever kind of, lackadaisical excuse that might come. And then you see other businesses being founded by those same VCs where you wonder what metrics could have been, exciting about those.
Well, the thing is, a lot of investors speak about the fact that the investment community is fairly small, right? And so they're able to exchange information and data about different companies. And the founder community is not necessarily all that small, but founders talk. And to Renaldo's point, there are a number of companies, and I've spoken to a number of Black and brown founders over the course of the last month, where there are clear examples of companies that they have founded and their competitors' companies that had been funded by the same VCs that had turned them down, where the metrics actually weren't as good. And sometimes the common refrain from investors may be, hey, maybe it was a team, maybe it was a team decision. But if that is the case, then that clearly speaks to the not very unconscious bias. If it's a team decision, then you're clearly talking to some racial bias that exists there. And I've seen a number of examples of that over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, where it's been pretty interesting looking at how investors have invested in companies that have been competitive and turned down other companies that may have been in a better position if you're simply looking at it from a quantifiable perspective.
Carlton, do you want to unmute and add and chime in?
Hi, I'm Carlton from Animal Biome. Thanks for the conversation. Renaldo and Zubin, spot on comments. There's, I would say, particularly in the pet care space, there is not a pipeline problem for companies, and just laddering on what Renaldo was saying, that there are companies founded by African Americans that definitely get overlooked, and it's often that sort of, they don't even give you real feedback kind of thing. And but then I also think that one of the other sort of problems we see in the pet care space is there are a lot of companies founded by women that also get overlooked. And Animal Biome's founded by my wife Holly, and she even had a VC tell her after a meeting that her team had a gender bias problem because they were all women, and but said nothing of the fact that they were all men at the VC. And so I think it's almost like, yes, there's definitely lots of unconscious bias against people of color, but it does seem like women also get the very conscious comments as well. And a couple weeks ago, I attended a panel discussion for companies in the pet care space, and it was very interesting who was chosen to speak and on the panel, and like the way they spoke, their backgrounds really said something that about who they were deciding was qualified to be a voice in the industry. And so I just think that, you know, that unconscious bias is there, the conscious bias is there. I mean, other than like having everyone on this call like sort of see it, acknowledge it, and call it out, I don't have great answers for how we fix that. So that's what I'd like to put out to the group here, is ideas on how to address that.
I saw that Black DVM was sharing some really interesting comments, so I want to invite him or her, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, to chime in on the conversation.
Yeah, sure. I'm pretty informal right now, so I won't turn on my video, but so my name is Tiara. I'm from Black DVM Network, which is an organization that was founded in 2018 to support Black veterinary professionals. I was invited to this space by a couple of people that reached out due to the newfound exposure that we've gotten in the last couple of weeks. And so I really appreciate you all putting this on. And as a veterinarian, I just graduated in May. I think that it is really important for us to veterinarians and the pet care industry to try to work together, maybe a little bit more. I'm not sure how much involvement is there, but it's nice to be here. So I commented on the pipeline, and in veterinary medicine, we have been focusing on the pipeline, and we are getting more students into veterinary schools, more Black students, more minorities into veterinary schools. But Black DVM Network was founded because there was no support for veterinary professionals for the students after they're in vet school and beyond. And, you know, addressing the pipeline and getting students there, getting people into the industries is awesome, but how are you supporting them once they're there? And so I kind of just wanted to make that comment about the pipeline, because I think that focusing on the pipeline distracts us from the lack of support that that is in the industry, and the lack of the support that Black professionals that are currently in the space you know, don't have. So someone asked me for ideas, solutions. Diversity is a huge problem, right? Like it's not something that, you know, we didn't care about yesterday and today we care about and tomorrow it's fixed. It's a huge problem. There's a lot of change, a lot of growth that has to come with it. But I think on an individual level, if people are looking for things that you can do individually, if you feel like, and you probably do, right? You guys have companies, you guys are founders, you work for big companies, be intentional about finding a person of color to mentor. It's so easy to get connected with people that are in your network. More than likely, those people are going to look like you. So a person of color is probably not going to walk into your office. You almost have to be intentional about it. And as a founder of a new company, I need a ton of support. I did not gain any support until this movement came along. No one cared about Black DVM Network until about 3 weeks ago. I only had Black veterinary professionals in my inbox or in my space, and now I'm being completely overwhelmed with people that want to support. That is awesome, but you know, how do we continue to expose these people that need support, that need funding, that need guidance, mentorship? Because I am the first person in my family to have founded a company. So I really don't know where to turn when you know, talking about pitching and sponsorship and networking and things like that. So I just wanted to add that piece about the pipeline and about being, you know, on an individual level, being intentional about mentoring people of color.
Carla, can I jump in?
Please do.
Hi, Tiara. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you so much for putting on the event on Friday, the Black DVM Network Happy Hour. That was the highlight of my week, and it certainly kind of motivated and inspired me, seeing so many.
Glad you were there.
so many awesome Black DVMs. So thank you so much for that. And I totally understand where you're coming from. So firstly, I'll offer myself up. You actually have in your inbox an email from me yesterday. If there's anything I can help with in terms of funding advice, company building, team building, etc., feel free to reach out to me. I do absolutely agree that this is something that hasn't been provided enough attention up until now. This isn't new for Black people. Black people have been talking, advocating, and protesting for racial justice and equality for centuries. I'm really glad that we're listening now. We've actually had conversations, and I've spoken to my investors about this, in that a lot of folks have kind of reached out saying, oh, can I speak to all of your Black founders or all of your friends that are Black founders or brown founders? Can I speak to them right now? And the refrain or my response is, hey, don't do this because this is en vogue to do right now, and don't inundate yourself to a point where you're not capable of actually providing the right level of attention to the folks that you're engaging with. And so if you're thinking that you're going to engage with 100 to 150 companies, don't do it in 1 month. Do 10 a month for the next year, and try to make sure that when we review this at the end of next year, there is real diversity in your portfolio, and you have made the wire, right? You've sent the wire, you've made the hire, you've actually taken action, rather than just kind of gone through this process to make yourself feel good as if you're actually addressing for what's happening right now. Because that self-gratification, actually, it doesn't help, and it actually hurts the community more. Because Renaldo and myself and everyone else, we're taking time to be here. And in many ways, we want to make sure that we're trying to help further the awareness. But this isn't an instance where people of color should be encumbered by having to walk the community through this journey for self-gratification purposes. So we'll take action, and let's really make sure that this isn't something that happens only today, but that it happens over the course of a prolonged period of time to have real sustained change.
Yeah, I think it really like your advice about going deep there, Zubin, as opposed to, just trying to talk to everyone. I think, really finding a couple of, whether it's a specific, vertical in the pet care industry that you're excited about, or, specific people, or whether, geographic location, et cetera, that, you can help and assist. I think that makes sense. And, especially I think on the Mars side with Kinship, I know you all have had, I think, obviously you've had the League Venture Studios Accelerator that I was a part of, Carlton as well. I know you've done like specific things in terms of like the women roundtable, et cetera. Like, what are in your plans, I think now kind of coming out of, roundtables such as this, of, further helping, people of color in their entrepreneurial efforts in the pet care space?
Assad, do you want to take this or?
Yeah, sure. Of course. Yeah, no, I think that, in certainly the past 4 or 5 weeks, we've really kind of stepped back to see, how we can support diverse founders. And so some of the initiatives that so I think there's like kind of what you're talking about. There's some short-term things that we're doing, and then there's some midterm and long-term things that we're thinking about as well. And I think, in the short term, conversations like this, we're hoping to do this at least monthly for a little while to see if we can get more engagement from people and action from people. We are, last year we hosted a 1-week boot camp for founders, for female founders. This year it's going to be both female and people of color founders. And so we're hoping that application is open now. Isabel, if you could maybe share the link. We'd love to have more diverse founders applying for that. I think for us, I think then at Kinship and at Companion Fund, at Leap, we're continuing to think about how we can support startups in the long term, and we're in the middle stages of those discussions right now. So more will be coming, out in the next month or so. But we are here, Isabel and I. Our job is to connect founders with the resources that they need. And we know that we've failed to support the Black community thus far in the past year that we've been doing this. And so, part of what we're here, I would love ideas for what we can do. I think I heard from, I forgot your name, but from the DVM network, mentorship is key. And so I think we're going to take this offline and see what we can do to help provide that. Certainly, funding and grants have been talked about as well. So everything's on the table, and I know we both are really excited to try to help act on this and act in the short term and long term. So please don't hesitate to reach out and share your ideas and hold us accountable, please. If we haven't done anything in 3 months, 6 months, in a year, tell people to fire me and Isabel.
Just to add on to the mentorship and internship programs, we actually are actively pursuing that as we speak. Some of my group members for the mentorship program are here today. Hey guys, figuring out how to support and where to support it at what level. Is it college? Is it high school? How do we get people interested in pet industry, in tech early on, and actually support them in a way that they actually make it to college and graduate and get these opportunities that they might not necessarily be aware of otherwise. So that is something we're actually actively pursuing, and we hope to get LEAP founders involved with as well. So another thing I wanted to just go back a little bit was this concept that I've been seeing around a lot on Twitter and just in different conversations of the fact that Black founders are overeducated and underfunded. And as a community, what we can do to support there and make the wire. Because we can do these paid internship programs, we can do mentorships, but it's really sounding like it just needs to be happening at all levels. I think Zubin, you had used the phrase like 100 or 1,000 flowers blooming at once. Like a lot needs to happen for change to actually occur. So does anyone have any thoughts there? And I'll get to the chat in a bit, guys. I'm seeing some great questions and responses to other topics.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the sourcing process is very broken. So I think that's probably where one of the areas I would start. Identifying how we're actually, picking, the founders, et cetera, we're bringing in for pitch, opportunities. I think is important to do, and then in the vetting, and I sat in at, as a member of El Caterton, sat in on all of their investment meetings. So I see the people generally around the table that are deciding, what companies they want to buy and kind of the decision-making processes they're going through. And it's, I don't see how you're going to, pick more Black businesses to fund if you don't have more Black people there deciding if these businesses, should be funded, et cetera. So, they don't necessarily need to be part of those VC funds, but I think, even tapping, people like myself or Zubin for, hey, these are companies we're looking at, or help or asking us or other people, the Black DVM network, who are people that are doing interesting things we should have on our radar. VCs all the time say they like to build relationships. I don't see this relationship building kind of happening in the in communities of color. So I would love to kind of see that happen. And I think at Kinship, some of the things you all can do there to support is building that network and database. I think it's right now, I think if we were to ask, hey, who are the Black, founders in the pet care space? No one can kind of say, here's a list of everyone that is there, which is, I think, another, problem that's emblematic of what's going on here. So I think really fixing that sourcing process, getting more diverse people in the room to help with the decisions, or at least seeking out their feedback, I think could go a long way. And then you can find a couple of, diamonds in the rough. Those businesses, I'm sure some percentage of them will be successful. And then that can also help power the community. Because I think I also want some of that to just happen from, certain Black people need to be able to make these funding decisions too, and to be able to make those wires. And I think that'll kind of, have kind of compounding effects over time.
Yeah, and Renaldo, to your point there, I think the folks that are sitting around the table that are making the investment decisions or making the decisions around who gets into the accelerators or making the wire, right? There are very few people of color, and it's been spoken about in the veterinary capital community, in the venture capital community, but it's having more representation at that level is key. I think the other thing to think about here, and we kind of talk about the societal component of this, there's another component where there are all of these studies, right? Whether it be by McKinsey or Harvard or Bain and all of these think tanks that clearly point that diverse teams are more profitable, more innovative, smarter, and deliver better returns. And so, like, if we bring it back to the capitalistic perspective, there's a real rationale there to really focus on diversity and why it's something that's important. I think someone asked a question earlier around taking this away from being a political, or how do you avoid it being a political situation and kind of potentially putting your business or your reputation at risk. I don't think anyone wants to be on the wrong side of this in 10 years' time. Like when the history is written and when people are looking back, you want to be sitting on the right side and being comfortable and being able to tell our children and the people that hopefully aspire to be like us in the future, that the key decisions that are made, or the key decisions that were made today, we were sat on the right side of that. And so I come from this from a different perspective, right? I'm from South Africa. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. And what's interesting to me, to that point that I made earlier around, like, Black and brown people have been protesting for centuries. And now we're collectively waking up, right? And white people are now waking up to this. But that isn't new. Like, the reason apartheid came to an end was not because of what was happening in South Africa, but because folks in DC started marching, and folks in London started marching, and Australia, and Berkeley. And I look at UC Berkeley over here, and a bunch of students basically went to the school and said, hey, you need to cut off all connections to South African businesses and all of the endowments that are worth billions of dollars. And that is what led to apartheid falling down. And thankfully, fortunately, I have had the opportunities that I have today as a result of that. And so Black and brown people are now, again, putting our hands up and saying that this is something that is a societal issue. But collectively, this is something that really white people have the power and the ability to be able to really affect change. And so we'll need allyship and we'll need action. But the question is there a will? And I think that's one of the key questions that I've been asking a lot of my investors and having very kind of clear conversations with some of my friends is there a will to make that change today? Because that change will come at some cost.
Thanks, Zubin. Did someone else want to add?
Oh, I was just gonna build on it, and I love that you started that with, the even if you wanted to look at this through a capitalistic lens, right? There are reasons to want to be on the right side of history as well. So hopefully that's enough to motivate some people, if it's not just out of the goodness of their hearts, right?
Yeah.
Renaldo, that's well timed. Denise actually just wrote in the chat, can we talk about what research and data needs to be unearthed so that we can prove diversity is good for business and pet care? Pet parenthood and consumption behaviors are so different for different US demos. I agree no one wants to be on the wrong side of this, but I think pointing to revenue will make this about not just good policy, but good business. I actually do think that there is like a plethora of data out there that is pointing towards diversity in, founding teams, just your colleagues in general, means better innovation, greater innovation, pardon me. Zubin, is this a link to that?
That's one of them, yeah. And there's plenty more, but I just thought that I'd send what I've come across already.
Oh, great. And then Drew Taylor, he actually helps lead investing activities at Companion Fund, and he wants to further engage on this topic. So if anyone wants to speak to Drew directly, and we should definitely have you on a future roundtable. So a little bit further back, we're getting so much engagement. This is great. Thank you so much, everyone. There was mention of how to best discuss this as a topic, that maybe companies are a little afraid to broach it for, saying the wrong thing. are there any rules of engagement surrounding this topic? And it might seem like a bit of a mundane question, but it's important in terms of creating a space for real dialogue that's going to have actionable change. And it seems that, you know, white people become frightened of saying or doing, or, you know, doing or saying the wrong thing. And this is really for the room. Any feedback or advice on approaching this?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I think it's important to establish, you know, mutual respect and mutual understanding, mutual purpose. I think if you can, you know, align yourselves in having the conversations in that way, and just letting, you know, people know you are an ally and that you are trying to help, you know, change how things are being done, etc. I always think that's a great way to start, and then ask your questions that you may be a little bit nervous about, right? The person on the other side, remember, they're just a person. There are all kinds of things you can say outside of, questions around race and et cetera that might upset them. So if you wanted to, you know, ask them a question about something else that wasn't related to that, you would probably try to, make a connection before you start asking certain personal questions or things you think might bother them. So I would, you know, pretty much kind of take that aspect, and also come through with the understanding that, you know, if you're doing a little bit of what, you know, myself and Zubin have been saying, and you're putting in the effort consistently, you know, generally I think you get more room for maybe a potential, you know, faux pas if there may be one. And I think that shouldn't make anyone nervous about, you know, trying to address change, as long as you're going through and you know, making sure that everyone understands the ground you're coming from, with questions or other comments. I believe people will be understanding, and I have not seen, at least kind of in, you know, my workings of kind of dialogues like this, where, you know, people weren't receptive to, you know, helping people kind of fill in gaps or answering their questions. And oftentimes it's a pretty quick answer, like just now, like is diversity really important? Like what are those studies? You know, we're able to, 2 or 3 were just fired off into the chat. So I think you can also get your questions answered pretty quickly with the amount of research and information that's out there.
Thank you so much. Kimberly asks, do people do this publicly or privately? The few instances of people being attacked publicly has caused people to shut down and remain silent on the topic of diversity in the industry community. I guess this goes hand in hand with, you know, the idea of cancel culture and people being afraid of being called out. Yes. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know, I wonder if the people that were, you know, quote unquote canceled were, you know, sending the wire or making the hire, right? Again, I think it comes down to action. And as long as you are acting in a way that shows your true beliefs and you're being consistent with that, yeah, I don't think there are examples where, you know, that's led to, you know, very like, you know, negative, you know, implications.
Oh, yep. Madeline brought up a really good point. I think the word attacked is the problem here. Someone giving you feedback means they want to help you be better. How can you let BIPOC know that you're receptive to feedback without coming off as making them responsible for your growth? Thanks, Madeline. Madeline, I don't know if you want to jump in the chat and share any thoughts furthering that, but thank you.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Madeline, did you want to jump in? I don't want to speak over you.
That's great.
Yeah, no, I just think that there's kind of a balance between putting the onus on Black people to help us be better, versus saying, you know, I am receptive to feedback. I won't feel attacked if you do call me out when I mess up.
Yeah, there's also a lot of learned behavior that's involved in this, and so if you think about the background, this isn't something that we're going to be able to address for today just because it's a topic of conversation today. This goes back hundreds of years. And so with those hundreds of years, if you think about us as human beings, we all have trauma that have shaped how we interact and act and behave and engage today. And so think about that at a societal level, for at large people of color. And so even myself, when I was speaking earlier, sometimes I kind of choke on the word by saying white people, because I don't want to vilify white people. That is never my intention. And I'm not really looking to kind of paint everyone with a broad brushstroke. and that's a learned behavior from me. But to Carla's point, I think there is a lot of call out culture that is out there. And I do think that sometimes that can be counterproductive, where there is a real meaningful intention for folks to want to learn or act or be educated. I do think that there was a good point that someone made that where black people aren't the kind of therapists at large, or they're also not the educators at large. Like it's fairly easy to be able to go and search for something and find information and resources to be able to ramp up. There are books out there that obviously have been surfaced and recommended, like white politics, white fragility, and a number of others that people have the opportunity to be able to go out there and educate themselves. But I also think that we shouldn't look to shut down conversations. We should really try and enable and foster safe communities to have these dialogues with the intention of real change and action. So educate, educate, and actually, why people have conversations amongst yourselves. Like, don't let this just be conversations that you're having with people of color. Have conversations in white groups. Learn, understand. They're going to be really awkward. This is a really awkward topic of conversation. We're having to dig deep. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of trauma. I will say that I, for 2 weeks, could not stop breaking down in tears as everything was going on, because there was a lot of trauma that had been resurfaced in me. And hopefully you can empathize with some of that to recognize how we can create a path forward collectively. But this is going to be difficult, and that's where the will to really impact change is going to be really important.
Thank you, Zubin. And we only have 9 minutes left. So I just want to first underscore the fact that in terms of moving forward, while we are so appreciative of both of your guys' time, it's ultimately on us to start moving these forward and not relying on you guys to give us answers. So thank you so much for taking the time today. Is there anything that either of you would like to cover in terms of discussion today, or like to bring back?
Yeah, I think we've been having sidebar conversations on this, Carla. So I'll do two things. Kind of one of them is if I had a message that I would want everyone to take away from this, what would that be? And I kind of pointed to this earlier, so I'll restate it. What we're witnessing today and the discussion that is being had today is not new for Black people or brown people. We've been talking, advocating, protesting for racial justice, for equality, for equal opportunities for centuries. We're really glad that the community at large is starting to talk about this. The power for real action rests in the hands of white people. Because we can come to this conversation and have these dialogues as much as we want, but really the power rests in the hands of white people. So that's the first one. And actually a good part into my second point, which I'd had with the Kinship team, is we need to get the executives in these conversations. We need to get the executives at the biggest companies, whether that be Nestle, Mars, IDEX, Zoetis, and the organizations and associations, AVMA, etc., and the universities involved in these conversations and dialogues, and having a meaningful discussion around what comes next and what the action is that will be taken. One question I had for folks that are DVMs out here is when we're going to have a Black dean at Texas A&M, right? When we going to have a Black dean at UC Davis? So hopefully that isn't something that is too crazy to think about, but I know that for a lot of people that are attending those schools, that's a kind of almost a reality check for the conversation that we're having right now.
Thank you, Renaldo.
I thought that was really well said. I don't know if I could follow that too well, Zubin, but I think the only thing I would probably say is, I think, at the Kinship group, you all, I think, have done a good job with the accelerators and reaching out and having, these panels. So I think the one thing I would, maybe request is, as you're thinking about what, additional opportunities look like for people of color throughout your organization, would love if, myself, other people on this call were kind of included for tossing around those ideas and maybe helping shape some of those cohorts. I think that can be important. Just getting more people of color just involved in the decision-making process of, how some of this funding, internship, accelerators, et cetera, can happen.
Thank you. Would definitely appreciate that opportunity. So thank you for offering. Assad, I will go ahead and toss it over to you.
Zubin, Renaldo, Carla, thank you so much, and everybody else who participated today. We're just so grateful that we're taking the time, and thank you everybody else for joining. I think I've taken a couple pages of notes on things and comments. So definitely more learning and growing to come. And just so thank you very much for everything that you guys are doing. We are going to continue this conversation. This is not the first and only thing that we're doing. And I know we've been talking with Carlton about hosting something next month. And if anybody else wants to, host something or suggest an idea for us to do, we're open. I will stay on, for another 10 or 15 minutes or longer. If people want to ideate a little bit more with me and Isabel, and see how we can at LEAP and Kinship and MFA really move this conversation forward and start acting in a very meaningful way. With that, Isabel, do you want to share some of the stuff that we have going on and how they can get involved?
Definitely. So just echoing Assad, thank you again, everyone, for joining today. I think this is one of our highest attended webinars, which is really, really great. And the recording will be shared on YouTube after as well. Our upcoming Leap Venture Academy events includes our summer series, which we announced last week. That is going to be a virtual pitch competition in August. In September, we're hosting a multi-day boot camp. It will take place over a week virtually for both founders and CEOs that identify as female and or as a person of color. As well as in October, we're hosting an event specifically for cat-related startups. The application closes on July 12th. If you have questions about anything, please reach out to me or Assad. I'll be sharing also the link to our Slack channel if you aren't already there, and we'll be posting more about events through the Slack channel as well.
Great. Well, thank you all again, and Isabel and I will stay on for a little bit, and if anybody wants to share their thoughts or comments or ways that we can help, yeah, we're all ears, but I guess we'll stop the recording now. And thank